Hey, Shannon here. Welcome to Let's Talk to Animals, the podcast and blogcast that all species can enjoy together. This week, I have a fresh new episode for you featuring the hot topic of pet anxiety. Pet anxiety is the thing, right? It's something that we pet parents, animal guardians, fosters, carers, we are always on the lookout for. We feel it and sense for it very deeply. We're always concerned about it and frequently worried that our pets are feeling anxious without necessarily receiving any outward conscious confirmation that this is actually the case. And what often happens without our even realizing it is that we gather a whole variety of different feelings and observations and hunches and vague ideas under the header of pet anxiety without ever really knowing that that is what we are observing or witnessing. And it also can be a really confusing journey through the traditional pet healthcare model, trying to determine first, is it pet anxiety? And second, if yes, where is it coming from? And based on where it's coming from, what do we need to do to ease it, to offer our pet some relief? And it is just as common for us as the human animal in the mix, as the pet guardian, the one sitting behind the buck stops here desk blotter, the one who really kind of calls the shots and makes the majority of decisions in our interspecies family. It frequently escapes our attention that our own state of anxiety or lack thereof can deeply impact our animal companions. And so this is what we are going to take a deep dive look at today for today's episode on pet anxiety, which I have given the working title, Pet Anxiety. What is it? How do we know when our pet has it? And as animal communicators, what do we look for when we're talking with your pet, trying to determine if they are feeling anxious? And if so, where's it coming from? And what do we need to do to address it? Longest working title in the world, but I hope you get my drift, my meaning, so to speak. So let's start with the basics. Let's start with the different levels at which anxiety can be present. There are really 5 different levels that anxiety can manifest at. The first being, of course, the physical. And while I say, of course, I recognize that for most of us, the word anxiety, the association that we humans have in our 3D left brains, is that anxiety is an emotion. But it is important and beneficial to remember that anxiety is also a biochemical reaction. If we are feeling anxious versus joyful versus sad versus angry, there's a different biochemical process going on in our brains with our hormones, with our neurotransmitters. And so while anxiety, we may relate to it as an emotion, we may relate to it at the emotional level and only at the emotional level. More and more modern medical science for both humans and non-human animals is teaching us that sometimes those anxious emotional states can originate with the physical. For instance, if there is some level of physical dis-ease going on or an exposure to an environmental agent or toxin that is creating dysregulation in the body system. If there is an injury, if there is an illness, if there is an extreme disruption in daily routine, or an undiagnosed allergy, or there are all kinds, we could follow that rabbit trail forever, but there are so many physical based issues that can then give rise to the physical, the emotional, the mental sensation of anxiety. So sometimes when we see what we're labeling as the emotion of anxiety can actually be traced all the way back to a physical core cause. However, that is not always the case. Of course, emotions can make our body feel wildly uncomfortable. As just a very personal example, I went through a grief process lately over the loss of a relationship in my life, and I felt a lot of chest pain. If you've ever heard of heartbreak syndrome, you are already familiar with how emotional dysregulation can trickle downhill and manifest at the physical level. As we get into our conversation today, and I talk a little bit more about what I personally can't speak for other animal communicators, but certainly what I look for as an animal communicator when I'm talking with your pets and I'm trying to determine, is it anxiety? If yes, where is the root cause? What is that deepest level? Because of course we don't just want to bandage it. We want to get all the way down to the deepest level, find the core trigger and begin addressing it there. And based on what we find, based on what I discover when I'm talking with your animal, that is going to then lead us in the direction of the proper remedy. So this is the next level then, anxiety that originates at the emotional level. And of course, sometimes emotional dysregulation, anxiety, does not necessarily lead to overt physical symptoms, but can manifest as behavior changes, changes in relationships, changes in hobbies or habits. And so these can also be indicators that what we're really dealing with is anxiety originating at the emotional level versus perhaps at the physical level. Now, there's also anxiety that can originate at the mental level. There's a lot of debate about whether animals think and how much they think in terms of what we human animals define as thinking. For us, thinking is a never-ending, kind of almost like a stream of consciousness activity that takes place in our 3D left brains all day, every day. Our brains, especially that left hemisphere, they are meaning-making machines. In intuitive anatomy, which is different from biological anatomy, but intuitive anatomy is what I teach when I teach animal communications. You can understand your intuitive wiring, the internal, what I call operating system that is inbuilt, present from birth, that provides you with the means to have intuitive two-way conversations with other humans and with non-human animals. So when we're looking at that intuitive anatomy, we are looking at a left brain mind that has one job to do: to receive, decode, translate into words, and share intuitive data or information, the emotions, thoughts, experiences, etc., of the animal conversation partner. While our non-human animal planet mates may not think obsessively in the way that we human animals tend to do, they may not have a brain structure that is as optimized for the heady lives we lead today. That doesn't mean that they don't think. My experience, however, has been that animals think more through their emotions. They think more through their feelings. Why? Because that is more functional. It's also faster. And for wild animals in particular, and even for our companion animals, still being hooked so intimately into the fight or flight defense system, always aiming to feed and not get fed on, to find dinner and not be dinner, it is more functional to tap into your vibes, gut brain, your emotional system, and just skip the thinking already. For us humans, it just adds an extra layer. It adds an extra step onto our process. It makes us slower communicators and in many ways, stupider communicators. I realize that's not really a word, but we're slower and we are less trusting of our own multi-layered system of the information that it's giving us because we have this overactive, overly involved left brain hemisphere that is constantly seeking for meaning and turning it into words and delivering it to us like it's the buck itself, so to speak. So with our animals, thoughts do come through, and repetitive thoughts in particular tend to be what generate anxiety. So if I'm connecting in with an animal and I'm seeking for first, is this anxiety as a pet parent? If what you have come to me seeking an explanation for or information about truly is anxiety, then where is it originating? If I'm picking up on repetitive thought patterns, then it's a likely possibility.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We are just about to open up enrollment for our next Animal Communication Adventure course. This is a small group, personally curated program that walks you through the steps of the exact process I use with every single animal communication client I work with. You will learn from a real life working animal communicator, no filler, no fluff, just solid, useful information to help you show up for every interspecies conversation that you have with your heart open, your mind calm and quiet, and your spirit confident. If this sounds like just what you've been looking for, I would love to invite you to join us. Head over to animallovelanguages.com/enroll. Okay?
That we're looking at a mental pattern that is producing the anxiety. Now, we can also see anxiety originate at what is alternately called the relational or the soul level. And that's really where we have these soul agreements, if you will, or soul contracts with other beings that we keep company with. Whether those soul contracts are because we're in a family together, maybe we are a mated pair. Maybe we live next door to one another. Maybe we work together. And these same types of structures exist across species boundaries. So, for instance, one of the things I always look for when I'm communicating with an animal and then recapping with their person is I'm always curious to ask about the nature of their soul agreement. What type of soul agreement do you share with your human? And there are so many different types of soul agreements. There can be the romantic pairing, the life mates, if you will. This is one that shows up constantly in my own life with the animal companions I'm closest to. There can be the teacher and the student. There can be the parent and the child. There can be the colleagues, the coworkers. There can be what I call the frenemies, and occasionally the have we mets, where we're really learning some deep soul lessons from each other. So taking a look at the nature of the relationship itself can give us great insight into, is it anxiety? If so, what is the function? What is the purpose? And is it shared? And this really gets us into an interesting territory where we're looking at your own relationship with anxiety or what we're calling anxiety. So your own human experience of anxiety and the animal's experience of what we're calling anxiety, and taking a look and seeing if there are any parallels. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. And the final, or the deepest, if you will, or the highest vibration level of any experience that we're observing and calling anxiety is what I call the spirit level. That's when we're looking at a soul joining with a physical 3D body and brain system that has certain inherent genetic properties or qualities that are advantageous for that soul's evolution. That was probably a mouthful for you, but when we look at why did you get the body you got? Did you choose it? Was it chosen for you? Was it a group decision? Did you make up your mind all on your own? Why this body and not that other body? It's interesting to look at family systems, whether human or non-human. Our puppy, for instance, when he came home, he already was showing a very distinct personality that was different from his puppy siblings. In my family, I have a very different personality, genetic makeup than my sibling. And you can probably see examples of this in your family life, even with your extended family. And with those you're not related to, we all get different gifts. We all get different challenges. I always find it so fascinating. Why am I predisposed to back troubles? And my friend has Crohn's disease, and my neighbor is dealing with rheumatoid arthritis. We all have different stuff, and we may never get any of what somebody else is dealing with. And why is that? And so this is the spirit level, where perhaps over and above even any physical or mental issues or emotional issues, there may be wiring that's already present that causes an animal to be predisposed towards more of what we might call an anxious or a nervous temperament. And where we can really see this playing out is in animal species where we humans have gotten in the mix and we've tinkered with their DNA. So we see this a lot in dogs, in cats, in horses, certainly other types of livestock, definitely with bird species, where we've gotten in there and we have decided that we want to genetically re-engineer what was already perfect to begin with, because we want to express certain traits or inhibit others. And that can, especially because we're not necessarily learned genetic scientists when we're doing this, we're really kind of experimenting off the cuff and just learning as we go along, can unfortunately sometimes end up actually emphasizing traits that we would have preferred not be emphasized, like an anxious temperament. So these are all the different levels. For me, as an animal intuitive, as I'm communicating with your pets, I am looking at these different levels. I'm gathering as much information as I can from you about what are you calling anxious when you come to me. Are you just having a vague gut sensation that your pet is anxious and you can't really pin it to anything specific, but you just can't get rid of the feeling? We call that a vibe or a hunch or a gut knowing in animal communication lingo. And I talk about that a lot more in my animal communication adventure courses. If you're interested in learning, we really take a deep dive into all of that. Or is it something that you are actually witnessing? You are seeing. And if you were a dog or a cat, if you were your pet, you too would be feeling anxious if you were doing that thing that they do. Is it something that doesn't necessarily present as anxiety, like, let's say, aggression or extreme shyness, but we know from animal behavior scientists that those kinds of personality traits can be an attempt to mask anxiety, either by being overly aggressive or being overly shy and retiring. So really wanting to understand, as the animal intuitive in the mix, really wanting to understand, what are you seeing that you're labeling as anxious? And let's find out if it really is. So we're looking at the physical, we're looking at the emotional, we're looking at the mental, we're looking at the relational or the soul contract level, and we're looking at that spirit level. Why did that animal's soul choose? There's always free will. There's always free choice, no matter who we are. When we come here into these 3D bodies to this earth plane, we are coming here as a volunteer to grow in wisdom and learn to love better, to make a positive contribution for our own benefit and for the benefit of all. Nobody is forced to come here. This is very important to understand. So why did this animal volunteer to come into this particular body, this particular brain, with this particular wiring, genetic wiring, brain wiring that is going to predispose them to have a certain type of personality, a certain type of temperament, a certain type of health, a certain type of body, a certain skill set, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the different things that I am looking at as an animal intuitive to try to find out what is at the root cause. Now, there's another layer to pet anxiety as well that is really important to look at during an animal communication session, and that is, where is the anxiety really stemming from? What type of anxiety is it? Let me unpack this a little bit further because that sounds just like what we just talked about, but it's actually really different. Here, what I'm looking at is this a purely animal originated anxiety? For instance, is it a health problem within that animal's physical system? Is it an exposure that that animal has had to perhaps an environmental toxin or a toxic relationship or a bad training experience or whatever it may be? Is it something that the animal has experienced pretty much on their own, and now you're kind of seeing the fallout manifest as anxiety? And another example of that would be maybe an animal that was rehomed and relinquished before you rescued them, and they're still dealing with some fallout from their past history. Another type of anxiety we could be looking at is, this is where soul contracts become important again, is it really yours? Is it your anxiety and the animal is kind of struggling through being around someone that's anxious? As we all know, if you walk into a mall during the holiday season, you're probably going to leave feeling more anxious than when you arrived. Why? Because there are lots of anxious people who are concerned about how their holidays are going to go this year. If somebody or such and so is going to be happy with their gift, how they're going to afford to host all their relatives and rearrange their schedule. There are so many deep issues that crop up around the holidays on all kinds of levels. Your time, your schedule, your sanity, your finances, your digestion, all kinds of different things. Are you making memories? Are you making the kind of memories you want to make? And so this is an example of being in a collective consciousness where it feels like anxiety is amplified. And it can't always be avoided. Life happens, right? Things happen to us. Maybe you are going through something like what I referenced earlier with a relationship that is just not working anymore. Maybe there's been a loss. I mean, over the last few years, I've had several deep losses. My father, my dearest friend, my box turtle, my soul bird. I mean, there have been lots of losses. Yes, that has caused spikes in my anxiety. And yes, my pets have had to weather that. So sometimes when I talk with an animal who is exhibiting symptoms that we're calling anxious, I find out it's not really theirs. It's just that they're kind of being marinated in an anxious home space. They're exposed to you or someone else in your family or a family state, especially if the loss is affecting or there's a change that's affecting the whole family. They're just a part of it. That's part of being a part of a family. And sometimes we just all have to kind of get through it together the best that we can and hopefully address each family member's needs individually so we get through it with minimal disruption and dysregulation. But sometimes it's not animal origin anxiety at all. It's human origin. It can even be world events origin. We've had so many disruptions to just the flow of safety and services and polite society. It doesn't feel so polite most of the time. We've had weather events that are completely unexpected, political events that are completely unexpected. And so what ends up happening is it amplifies anxiety on this planet. And we all just walk around feeling a little bit more anxious. And if you are a highly sensitive personality type, and there are highly sensitive people, there are highly sensitive pets, if you are interested in that topic, I highly recommend you head over to my resources section and free tools for pet parents. Download the Highly Sensitive Pet Help Guide. I've also recorded podcast episodes on HSPs, both people and pets. And so I will link those in the show notes, but I highly encourage you to head over and take advantage of these resources, because the more your wiring lends towards sensitivity, which is a genetic trait that's been found in over 100 species so far, the more you are likely to feel increased anxiety as our world goes through periods of collective anxiety as well. So that's the second type of anxiety. I may discover that it is really human generated and the pet is just dealing with the fallout like every other member of the family. I can also find, and this is where soul contracts really kick in, I can also find that it's kind of what I call a feedback loop. And typically in animal communication conversations, when I uncover an anxious feedback loop or any kind of feedback loop, what it looks like to me is I'll see kind of an infinity symbol, like my finger is tracing an infinity symbol. If you're listening to the audio version, that's what I'm doing on the video screen now over on YouTube. And what I see is we're kind of trading anxiety back and forth. And there's a couple different ways this can happen. The first way, which is a little bit less frequently detected and diagnosed, is what I just discovered with one of my pet parent clients who travels a lot. And he was worried about leaving his cat behind at the cat hotel. And he was coming to me saying, I am worried that my cat is going to be anxious or uncomfortable when I leave. When I tuned in with the cat, what I discovered is the cat was worried about him. Where was he? Was he going to be okay? And what was happening was being together. Every time my pet parent client would start to feel anxious, the cat would also start to feel anxious. And at that 3D conscious level, the cat would think, oh, maybe I should be worried about my person because they're feeling anxious. And then the cat would get worried. And then again, being in a small shared space and being deeply connected at the soul level, my pet parent client would start feeling worried and anxious and would think, oh, maybe it's my cat feeling anxious and I should worry about this and try to make some arrangements so he won't be so anxious while I'm gone. And so it's like literally you're trading anxiety back and forth. And it keeps this feedback loop going because neither party realizes that they're picking up on the anxiety of each other. And so instead of being able to downshift into peace and ease and calm, just recognizing this is what families do sometimes. Sometimes we just worry about one another. This is a way that we express our love. Maybe it's not the most comfortable way, but it is one way we have learned to express our love for one another is through worry, care, concern, and anxiety. But there are other ways to express love. And if we can catch this feedback loop, we can downshift into a calmer, more comfortable way to simply visualize. In their case, what we talked about was simply visualizing that everyone's having a really good time and we trust that we are supported, we are protected, whether we're traveling or staying home, and that all is well. Home is wherever our hearts are and all is well. And so this feels a lot better. But first we have to know what's going on. So is it purely animal generated anxiety that may be coming from an illness or an injury or some kind of biochemical wiring or an experience that happened before the two of you's path crossed, before you met? Is it something that is originating with you and it's simply affecting your animal, just kind of collateral damage, so to speak? Or is it something that is truly shared? And these are teaching moments. These are moments when we realize we are both being called to up our game, to transmute anxiety, nerves, worry into something that feels better and works better for the relationship. So we're really teaching each other through this feedback loop. So, of course, these are the kinds of things that I am looking for as I'm having conversations with your animals. And I'm also seeking to further define what anxiety actually is, what it really looks like versus all of these other things that we've been talking about. So when you say my pet is anxious, expect that I'm going to ask you to tell me about what you're labeling as anxious. And I love this part of our conversation because I find out so much more about what you're really witnessing, and it allows me to ask much more detailed questions that are much more accurate. So I make sure that your pet really understands what is it you're witnessing or sensing or feeling, not just asking your animal, why are you anxious? Or what are you anxious about? Because that is making assumptions. And if you have been following along with me here on Let's Talk to Animals, or you've been a part of my weekly love letter community or my student community for any length of time, you know that I live and breathe by Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements. And one of those agreements is do not make assumptions. Instead, ask good questions and ask better questions. In other words, pay more attention to what is really there. Assumption making is lazy behavior. It's useful at the fight or flight level when we don't have time to gather a lot of data before we decide what to do about that shadow lurking behind the tree trunk right ahead of us on the path. We don't have a lot of time to sit and really dig into, well, does the shadow look more like my best friend who's waiting to meet up with me, or a really hungry, drooling, saber-toothed tiger? We really need to make an assumption as best we can based on what we've seen in the past and what's worked before, so we can decide whether to come closer or run away. But animal communication is not fight or flight. Animal communication is attention to detail. It's the parasympathetic nervous system in action. So we have to really understand there are nuances of both systems, the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system at play here. And we need to be able to parse apart which system to follow and what information each system mechanism has to offer us. And so here, what we're looking at is this animal isn't in immediate danger. This animal is not dealing with life-altering threats. This animal is reacting to something in certain ways. And we want to really get deep down into what is it? What is it that's causing or triggering the behavior? And why are we, the human animal, labeling what we're seeing as anxiety? Where is that coming from? Is it a deep gut knowing? Is it just an assumption that we are casually and maybe even lazily making? Because let's be honest, pet parent is not the only hat perched precariously on top of our heads. We have a lot of responsibilities. Being an adult human animal today comes with a lot of responsibilities attached. So it's not uncommon to get a little bit lazy about, well, my animal was known to have anxiety before, or my animal was diagnosed with anxiety before, or all the blogs I read on the internet say that when an animal does this, it means they're anxious. Plus, we tend to want to have a working theory, at least in place, when we seek out the services of someone like an animal communicator, it can be helpful to have some kind of at least general umbrella language to use to describe what we're seeing. So my job as the communicator is to get detailed with you, to dig down under the surface and find out, okay, what are you labeling as anxiety? Can you tell me more about that? Can you explain exactly what you're seeing, hearing, sensing, feeling? I'm asking you to tune into your own intuitive wiring, your intuitive operating system. This is why so many of my pet parent clients go on to study animal communication with me, because experiencing an animal communication session with your pet often serves as a wake-up call for you to start paying more attention to your own intuitive wiring, to what your own instincts are telling you, and to start using that as a tool to course correct in your own life, to raise your vibration, to make better choices that feel more aligned to who you know yourself to be in your heart of heart, in your soul of souls, to align in the direction of your true north, which is your big life goals and dreams, the reasons why you came here. And so it just makes sense. In fact, that's how I got into teaching. Is I had a whole group of pet parent clients that came to me within the space of a couple weeks and asked me if I taught. And I was like, well, no, but I guess I could. And you can see how that story played out. So if you're interested in learning animal communication, that's one of my great joys in life. And I would love to chat with you more about that. So you can drop a comment or send me an email over at animallovelanguages.com, and we can chat more about that. But for our purposes here, this is really good training ground. And sometimes I even discover that that is an underlying, kind of an undercurrent reason why your pet is expressing anxiety, is because there's untapped intuitive potential in you. And it serves you and it serves them better to point this out, to invite you to the intuitive party, to invite you along on a shared adventure where your pet isn't the only one doing the heavy lifting of receiving, decoding, and trying their best to share intuitive messages, where you're sharing the journey together and you're waking up to your shared intuitive pathways, your inbuilt, inborn intuitive communication abilities, and you are improving your lives together day by day as you do it. So pet anxiety, it can feel like the gift that keeps on giving, but so often it is a tremendous teaching tool for both the pet and their person. I have seen this again and again and again with my pet parent clients and their animal loves. And this is why I tend to recommend this these days. Whatever remedy, especially for anxiety that is not simply animal originated, whatever remedy or whatever next steps we come up with based on what your animal shares with me, chances are good that you will benefit from it too. I have certainly found this to be the case with my own animal family. So often we do share common issues like having a more nervous or sensitive or anxious temperament or wiring. And so many of the things that benefit my pets end up benefiting me too. And here's the really fun part. So often I'm too busy or distracted or lazy or whatever it is to really seek out those solutions for my own benefit. But if my animal is anxious or is struggling in any way, I'm not lazy. I will move heaven and earth to help them peace, to help them find ease, to help them find health, to help them find calm. This is just one more reason why I so often remind my pet parent clients and my animal communication students that our pets are our partners, empathic friends, and teachers throughout this life. And how do I know that? Because when I ask the animals why we call them pets, this is what they told me. We are your partners, your empathic friends, and your greatest teachers in this lifetime. And we are your greatest teachers because you love us unconditionally and you allow us to love you unconditionally. We learn the biggest lessons through the frequency of unconditional love. And our pets are always going to be the powerhouse teachers in our lives for exactly this reason. So if you are listening to this episode and you are a pet parent and you are worried that your animal is anxious, or you are absolutely certain that your animal is anxious, but you have not yet landed on an effective strategy to try to manage, hopefully eventually mitigate and ease, or even fully, hopefully resolve their anxiety, this may be your hint from your light team, from the universe, to give animal communication a seat at the table. Let's see what animal communication can do to support your pet to live their calmest, clearest, healthiest, happiest life with you. So I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I would love to hear your big aha moments, any questions you have, your stories, anything that you found that works to help your pets that have anxiety, and any questions you have about how animal communication can play a part in easing your pet's anxiety. I am releasing these episodes every 2 weeks. And so be sure to join my weekly love letter community. You will receive first notification for brand new episodes. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please do give it a like, give it a subscribe, share it with a friend, give us a review over on iTunes. It really helps our little podcast find its space and place in the greater podcastosphere, and certainly encourages me to keep sharing new episodes with you. So thank you for caring about animal communication and accompanying me on this ongoing learning journey. I send you and your interspecies family all my love, and bye for now.